I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today I'm driving the cheapest BMW that you can buy new here in Australia. This is the 118i, it lists for under 40,000 Australian dollars, and spoiler alert, right at the top of the review, in my opinion, this is actually one of the best BMWs that you can get. And that's because the recipe is so simple. This is a small, light, nimble 5-door hatchback, rear-wheel drive. That won't last much longer. The next 1 Series will be adopting the front-wheel drive mini platform, a turbocharged 3-cylinder engine that is incredibly willing up front and virtually no weight over the front axle. So all of that sounds pretty good to me. But what's also good is that gone are the days of buying a bargain BMW that has absolutely no equipment apart from the Roundel badge on the bonnet. One of the biggest surprises about the 118i is that it's actually quite well equipped. You get effectively everything you need in order to have a good, premium feeling city car. So, if I sound pretty positive about the 118i, it's because I am. So let's start running through some of the reasons why this is one of the best small hatchbacks that you can buy at the current point in time by jumping in and having a look at the interior. The real strength of the BMW 1 Series interior is that it's kept nice and simple. And that means that even though this car is getting on in years now, the design inside isn't aging badly. In fact, it's actually aging quite gracefully, with all the major functions still appearing pretty handsome and functional. So the dashboard is centered around this infotainment stack here. On the 118i, you do get BMW's lower end 6.5-inch system. It's not a touchscreen, instead it's controlled through an older style iDrive rotary dial between the seats. However, there's absolutely no problem with that because the system works brilliantly. There are still hard shortcut buttons next to the dial for things like your mapping and your audio options. It's incredibly intuitive, still one of the best systems to use in the business. It's also impressive that you do get navigation as standard on this absolute base model BMW as well. What's also standard are decent materials in the cabin. So the leather steering wheel in front of you feels nice in the hand. You do get a bit of sporty red stitching as well to match the red colouring that you find throughout the interior. So that also looks good. And materials further afield are also generally okay. So up on the dashboard there's soft touch material, and on the doors it's just a little bit hard down here where your leg comes to rest. As standard, you get a 6-speaker stereo in this car, and it actually sounds pretty good, so there's no real need to step up to the options of a better stereo, and I actually think I'd save my money. I wouldn't get the big navigation screen, which you can get as an option. However, you might want to tick Apple CarPlay, which is a fairly steep $479. You sit in comfortable seats that are actually sportier than you'd expect for the lowest end 1 Series. They are cloth. I think that's a good thing. I think that a good cloth seat is better than a cheap feeling leather seat, and that's the case here. The seats even have air bladders in the sides, so you can pump up the side bolstering. There's a manual leg extender, and it's easy to find a decent, if not absolutely perfect driving position in this car. Practicality also isn't bad. There are 2 medium-sized cup holders ahead of the shifter and a tray ahead of that. In this shallow center box here, you'll find the car's single USB port, and you can pop your phone in there. And the door bins are relatively large, however, they're not lined with felt to stop small items from scratching around. In fact, about the only place you can tell this is the base model BMW is here in the back seat, and that's because you get nothing. Well, that's not quite true. What you do get is a relatively comfortable seat. The bench goes up a little way, so it's a supportive seat to sit in. In terms of room, the 1 Series has always been challenged by the fact that it's a rear-wheel drive car, which means that having all the driving bits at the back limits rear legroom. And you can see that for me at 6 foot, my legroom is just okay. Toe room is actually pretty good. Headroom is more than decent for a 6-footer. So there's actually not a huge room problem back here if you're normal sized. And if you have kids, they'll actually be relatively comfortable. The problems come when you realize that the 118i doesn't have rear air vents, so it means that your back passengers are relying on air flowing all the way from the front. Every Volkswagen Golf has rear air vents, so there's really no excuse for that. There's no map pockets, there's no door bins for storing a bottle of water, there's no flip down center armrest for storing a cup of coffee or anything like that. So in terms of carrying backseat passengers, if you're going to be doing that frequently, you'll want to buy a 1 Series from further up the range. But if you're a single, if you're a couple, or if you've got friends that you don't particularly like, the 118i will be perfect. Behind the manual tailgate of the 1 Series, which you open with this badge, you'll find a boot that comes in at 360 litres. Now that's competitive with other hatchbacks this size. The Volkswagen Golf, for example, has 380 litres. So because this car is rear-wheel drive, you'd expect the boot to be a bit smaller, but it isn't. So the packaging is pretty good by BMW. It's also a good square space. The only slightly weird feature is that the boot floor slopes up a little bit in order to accommodate the beefed up rear axle. However, the rear seats do fold flat, creating 1,200 litres of space, which means that you can stack it up with a little bit of flat pack furniture. In terms of other special features, 2 shopping bag hooks, but there's no underfloor storage, nor is there a spare tyre because this car has run flat rubber. All BMW 1 Series that you can buy in Australia are rear-wheel drive, and they give you an option of an 8-speed automatic gearbox or a 6-speed manual at no cost difference. However, where you get the choice is in the engine that you put up the front. So in the 118i, this car has the 1.5 litre turbocharged 3-cylinder engine that you also find in the Mini lineup, and this is an absolutely awesome engine. Partially because it's really light, so the front axle actually feels like it has no weight on it whatsoever, and the steering is incredibly direct and fast in this car. But also because this 3-cylinder is really willing, it loves to be wound out, it's actually not slow, and it's also very economical. So really, it's the best of all worlds, and I don't really see too much reason to get more engine in the 1 Series unless you are stepping up to the M140i, which fits a bonkers 250 kilowatt inline 6 under that long front bonnet. But here in the 118i, what we have to work with is 100 kilowatts of power and 220 newton meters of torque. So certainly modest figures, but actually they produce a 0 to 100 sprint in this car of 8.7 seconds, which is certainly nothing to be ashamed of. And in fact, if you spend the extra $6,000 or $7,000 to step up to the BMW 120i, which has a 2-litre turbo with 135 kilowatts and 270 newton meters, you only get that 0 to 100 sprint down to 7.1 seconds. So not a huge return on investment in that car, in my opinion. The 3-cylinder also sounds really good with that trademark offbeat noise that is typical of these engines. And in fact, the 118i sounds better than any other 1 Series apart from perhaps the M140i when you're working it hard. And despite the fact that you do tend to work this car a little bit harder, we weren't able to make it use much fuel. In town, we recorded 8 litres per 100 Ks, and that wasn't being particularly gentle. On the highway, that falls into the 5s quite easily. However, it's really this car's handling that is its absolute strong point, and that's because blending rear-wheel drive architecture with really good steering and a light front end will always produce a good result. The 1 Series benefits from some of BMW's least corrupted steering feel as well. The steering in this car is still direct, quick, sharp and feelsome, and you can really tell what's going on at the front end. In fact, if there was a weak link in the package, it's actually an easy weak link to fix because it's the tyres. The Goodyear Efficient grips on this car just don't have all that much stick to them. However, it seems like a lot of 118i's are being sold with Pirelli Cinturato P7s that are much better. That said, the Goodyears provide a very supple ride quality, as do the small 16-inch wheels on this car. In fact, the ride quality on the 118i is better than a lot of high-end BMWs that have to have air suspension in order to make their 20-inch wheels ride more comfortably. Finally, in terms of adaptive safety, the BMW 1 Series is a bit of a mixed bag. You do get light autonomous emergency braking in this car, however, you can't outfit the 1 Series with blind spot monitoring or rear cross traffic at all. You can, however, add adaptive cruise control and lane departure warning as options. So those are my thoughts on the BMW 118i. Quite simply, if I was in the market for a small premium hatchback, this is the car I'd buy. You don't suffer for buying the base model BMW, quite to the contrary, you actually gain, as this car is arguably the purest interpretation of the BMW recipe on sale today, as it has a willing engine, but not one that is so fast that it overwhelms the beautifully balanced rear drive handling. Given that the 118i is also decently equipped and decently affordable, a package this good is a real rarity. It's also impossible to ignore that this rare package will not last much longer, as BMW shifts the 1 Series to a Mini-like front drive platform in future. So, if you're thinking about a car like this, now is the time. I give the 118i a strong recommendation.